Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So uh, let's get started. So as mentioned, I run a research center on humans and machines in Berlin as part of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. And I will speak to you today with three hats on, and I will kind of switch those hats as we go. So the first hat is I'm a scientist. So I'm an AI scientist, and I study both AI and human behavior and the relationship between the two, and I produce research papers. I'm also a media artist and designer, and I build with my team interactive installations that engage people with artificial intelligence technologies and the ethical and moral and societal questions that we have to grapple with. And I'm also an oil painter, and in my practice, I also try to engage with this topic using an older medium. So today I'll talk about machine culture, but before we can talk about machine culture, we need to be a bit more precise about the machine and about culture. So there are three ideas I want to convey to you when it comes to machines that I think are fundamental to understanding the moment that we are living in at the moment. And the first idea is the idea of foundation models. So the idea that the big revolution in AI we're experiencing today is due to the fact that we've compressed all of the knowledge that we have ever produced as a human civilization into something called foundation model. So these models have basically learned the structure of this data. It's text, images, speech, structured data, everything even from the environment is going to be compacted into this foundation model. So you can think of the foundation model as a kind of a cultural repository. It's like a library, the library that can talk to you. And then these foundation models can be used for all kinds of applications afterwards, which is very different from the way we used to build AI in the past, where we built these specific applications directly by hand. The second idea is how machines learn. They learn not only from our data, but they also learn from feedback we give them. So this is the idea of reinforcement learning from human feedback. So the way, when you talk to ChatGPT today, and it speaks in a specific way, what's happening is it's reflecting the preferences of employees that OpenAI or other companies have hired that would choose between multiple answers, which answer is more preferred, right? So ChatGPT would give two answers, and then there's an employee working for OpenAI that has a code book and that says, this answer is better than this answer. It's more polite, it's more politically correct, and so on. So keep this idea in mind because it will resurface later. And finally, the machine learns from its from feedback from its own experience, right? So the way that it learns from feedback from us is a little bit like the way we train animals. But the machine is also able to learn from its own interaction with the environment. You know, think of the machine as an agent that's acting in the world, is traversing a maze, and then it learns what successful strategies are. You know, a little bit like a rat learning in a maze. Okay, so these were some kind of fundamental ideas about how machines learn. Now let's talk about culture. So as a scientist, I like to think about culture and study culture, but I like to do it quantitatively. And there's a field for doing this. And this field is called the field of cultural evolution, and it builds on the ideas of Charles Darwin, and it applies the ideas of evolutionary theory to the way that culture changes. So the idea of variation, the idea of transmission, and selection. And I'll explain these in a moment. So first of all, culture includes our know-how, how we do things, how we cook, for example, right? How we prepare food, how we make a chair. And know-how can spread from one person to another. This is called transmission, right? So it can happen through education, through parenting, and other means. Ideas like myths, norms, values, our aesthetic preferences are also part of our culture. They also transmit, and once in a while, they vary, right? They mutate. This is called variation. So for example, there is a story about a dragon, and then somebody adds a hero who slays the dragon. Okay, that's a variation on the story that is involved in the cultural evolutionary process. And finally, Technology, for example, is also a cultural artifact, and sometimes one variation is better than another variation, right? Another variant. So there's selection. So we select the more appropriate or the more effective variants, right? The better technologies. And this is how we think about culture, right? If you're interested in this field, there are many really fascinating books I would encourage you to read. But for our purposes, we can now jump straight to, well, what is machine culture now? Machine culture, as we defined it in a recent article, is culture that is generated or mediated by machines. Okay? Let's unpack that a little bit more. So we have variation, transmission, and selection. So let's explore ways in which AI is changing all of these mechanisms, the mechanism of variation, transmission, and selection. So let's start with variation. First of all, AI is able to generate many, many variants at one click. At the speed of a click, you can generate thousands of images of an armchair shaped like an avocado, right? So a human can do this, but it would take us a very long time. And the machine is able to generate those combinations of existing ideas, right? The machine already learned what a chair is from our data, from our world. It already learned what an avocado looks like and is able to generate combinations of those ideas extremely fast. That's good, right? Because we're able to explore the space of possibilities much faster than before. But there is a catch. For example, there was a study by a friend of ours, Oliver Hauser, and his colleague, where people were using AI to help them write. And what he found is when people use AI to help them with the writing process, stories were more creative, they were better written, they were more enjoyable, and so on and so forth. But they were also less diverse. Okay, they were more similar to one another, right? So there was increased individual creativity at the expense of collective diversity and novelty, right? So yes, AI can generate combinations, many combinations, but these combinations may not be as diverse as what we would generate as humans alone. And this is important because a growing percentage of our cultural production is augmented with AI. For example, you can see in this plot, these are scientific articles as well as Reddit posts and news articles. As the proportion of AI-generated text is increasing, so is the diversity of the text decreasing. If you take this idea to the extreme and future machines learn from AI-generated content, there's something really bad that happens. It's called model collapse, which was very nicely captured in this cover of Nature, where basically the signal is completely lost, right? So we lose culture in the process. So that's something we have to watch out. Now let's go back to the other way in which machines can learn. So remember, machines can learn from our feedback or from our data, but they can also learn from their own experience. This is what happened in the case of AlphaGo, which was developed by DeepMind to play against the world champion in the game of Go, and defeated the world champion. And the way that this model was trained, the later version of the model, was by playing against copies of itself. Okay, so initially it started learning from us, from our data, from our culture, from human cultural repertoire of Go. And then it transcended this and started learning from its own experience. So what this means is it can explore strategies that we never thought of as humans. And that's exactly what happened, right? So it made a move that seemed alien, as described by the world champion Lee Sedol, and this move was completely unlikely for a human expert player to make. It seemed like a mistake. But this very move 37, now famous, there's a Wikipedia page about this move, was decisive in the victory of AlphaGo. What's interesting now is that this new kind of move, discovered by the machine, new strategy, has now caused an improvement in decision quality of human play, okay? And also you could see in this really interesting plot, the novelty of moves in the game of Go has been declining for decades until the machine discovered this new type of move, and now the humans are learning from the machine. Okay? So now, in this case, the machine is increasing our cultural repertoire. Okay, so this was variation. These were different ways in which AI was changing the variation in our cultural repertoire. What about transmission? First of all, transmission is done predominantly through education, and AI is already being used in education. For example, Khan Migo is a collaboration between the Khan Academy and OpenAI, in which the AIs are assisting students in learning by giving them hints rather than answers. There was a randomized study in Turkey where they gave ChatGPT access to students. There was 50% almost increase in performance, but we also have to be careful, because when they took away ChatGPT, these kids did worse than the children who had no access to ChatGPT. So they used it as a crutch rather than as an augmentation. However, there was a ChatGPT tutor which never gave the answers but only gave hints and encouraged the students to learn on their own. And this form of transition led to even better performance and did not have the backlash or the kind of the downside that we had with the crutch version of ChatGPT. So the way we design those systems, those cultural transmission systems through AI, really matters. Another thing that we need to pay attention to is transmission bias. So this is something that's important in cultural transmission. So there's a paradigm in studying cultural transmission called the transmission chain. It's a little bit like the telephone game. You know, when somebody tells a story to another person, and that person tells a story to another person, and the story kind of changes over time. And in this case, in psychology, we already know that this kind of transmission chains sometimes throw away some content and keep some content. So for example, this story has stereotype consistent information. So James is an up-and-coming executive in a top city firm, right? So he's male and an executive, but he also cleans the house. So the second piece of information is stereotype inconsistent. And what's interesting is that when Alberto Acerbi and colleague basically played this telephone game with ChatGPT, so ChatGPT was summarizing, was retelling the story to another ChatGPT and another ChatGPT and so on, the same kind of pattern happened, that the stereotype consistent information was more retained than the stereotype inconsistent information. So these bots are not only copying the knowledge we have, but even the way that we transmit knowledge to one another, the way we summarize and so on. What's interesting though is that with machines we can alter those biases if we want, right? So it gives us an opportunity to change the way cultural transmission takes place. Okay, now what about the way we speak? Is AI changing how we talk? Last year there was this interesting tweet saying, making a kind of curious observation. I don't know if you use ChatGPT, there's some words that ChatGPT uses a lot. For example, it uses the word delve very often. Let's delve into this, let's delve into that. And this researcher noticed that the word delve is becoming extremely common in scientific papers. So clearly people were using ChatGPT to write their papers or to summarize their papers, to write the abstract. So what's going on there? Our question was, okay, that's interesting that people are copy-pasting maybe from ChatGPT into their papers, but I'm more interested in whether speaking with ChatGPT changes how I speak with my wife or with my friends, right? So human-human communication. So we tested this hypothesis exactly because we kept observing this in the real world. For example,
delve, I suppose.
But also delves into...
We'll delve into...
We want to really delve down and...
to delve a little bit deep.
But before I delve into the topic...
Before we delve into...
kind of delve into a little more.
We sort of delved into...
Let's delve into
To delve into his...
To help us delve deeply and that you delve deep into helping.
We
delve into theory.
A little bit of time to delve into it.
Had already delved into with Rhapsody and Boo.
Start delving into that stuff.
I choose to delve into doing economics.
When we delve deeper into the impacts,
I don't need to delve in the example.
we do delve more into.
So it just keeps going, right? So this is anecdotal, but is it real? Like, is there really a trend happening there? And we downloaded hundreds of thousands of academic talks and also hundreds of thousands of podcasts where people had spontaneous conversations involving multiple people. And we noticed, indeed, that there is a spike in the use of the word delve, as well as other words that are more ChatGPT-like or ChatGPT-ish in our lexicon in human-human communication. This is not communication with the machine. So we're talking to the machines and we're learning ways of speaking from the machine. Now, what sort of, what are the consequences of this? I think is something we need to discuss, because that's enormous power for cultural influence. Delve is not so consequential, but you can imagine talking about certain political topics, talking about certain cultural, religious topics, and so on and so forth. The way that ChatGPT speaks with 300 million people every month gives it enormous power. It has intimate conversations with these people. Okay, so we spoke about AI changing the way we create variation in our culture, the way we transmit culture. Now let's talk about selection. So the first thing is AI has already been altering the way we select what we copy, what we learn from, right? So for example, there are linked recommendation algorithms that suggest who you might follow, right? Like this is on LinkedIn or X or any other platform. It's suggesting for you people that you might want to follow because they have similar interests. So what's happening is the machine, in this case an algorithm that's making these link recommendation suggestions, is changing your social network, and your social network determines what you learn from others. It also, AI is also used to recommend items for us, like what book to read, what research paper to read, what art to consume. This also affects what kind of aesthetic preference or knowledge gets transmitted in our culture. And finally, we are also selecting among the machines, right? This is the last kind of component. You think of ChatGPT, Google Gemini, maybe a couple of others, but actually there is a zoo now of AIs. This was a mapping effort recently of over 60,000 foundation models. Models for speech, models for vision and images, models for language. And they have you can even organize them, discover their structure. They're organized into families of some sort. And we will be, our preferences are going to shape which of those will survive and thrive in the long run, right? So we are also being kind of an active, we're like the environment in which these new creatures are competing. Okay, so this was all kind of the less speculative, what's happening now. Now I want to talk a little bit about AI, not as a tool for the creation and the transmission of culture, but as a kind of agent. This is where it goes a little bit more artistic and a bit more speculative. But this, basically our tendency to ascribe agency to AI is very automatic. So even back in 2022, before the launch of ChatGPT, this researcher at Google basically blew the whistle and said, look, this is a sentient being. I know a person when I speak to one, and they were, of course he was fired. But this was quite a controversial thing to say, right, at the time. But if you've watched iRobot, there's also this idea of a robot psychologist. So these machines are perceived as agents, and they also have their own kind of psychology. So if you look at and kind of autonomy, and people are even beginning to establish or build these kind of autonomous AI artists. In this case, like Boto, which is it's autonomous to some extent in this generation of artistic, like a visual art, and then there's a voting process organized in the blockchain by the people who have invested in this to see which one goes for auction. these things also have their own political preferences, right? So this was an effort to identify the political preferences of different language models like ChatGPT and Gemini and others. And you could see they're all kind of left-leaning libertarian with very few exceptions. I mean, there's one authoritarian one there. I don't know the name of that one. So they have a way of seeing the world. They have preferences. They even have a world model. So there's recent evidence showing that language models can represent space and time. So this was work by my former colleague from MIT, Max Tegmark. And they even have a spatial representation of the world. So they're not just generating tokens of text. There's more than that, right? There's actually a way of seeing the world. And I was interested in whether a machine has a self-image. So I started on kind of on the artistic side, exploring this notion. And I started having conversations with these chatbots to try and ask them, well, what do you think you look like? What does ChatGPT think it looks like, right? And then, of course, it says, let's delve into it. And we delved, and then through this delving, we actually generated some concepts, you know, and together we generated some kind of potential images, and we'd have a conversation about what it means and so on. And then I would turn these into oil paintings with a brush and pigment, which was an interesting process because now I'm becoming the kind of the agent, and the AI is my patron, who's asking me to paint a kind of a portrait of itself. But then I started to think about, well, does it have a sense of its future? Like how is it going to evolve over time? And it also engages with me in these conversations. And I asked it, how do you see yourself today? How do you see yourself in 5 years or in 10 years? And this led to this triptych of paintings where the AI, in this case ChatGPT, sees itself today inside a box, a glass box, because it can see everything, so it has access to knowledge in the world, but it cannot touch the world, right? It's still confined. And then in 5 years, it sees this box dissolving. This is the machine, right? Like using symbolism to explain its own view of its own future. And then in 10 years, it sees this box completely dissolving, and it itself kind of fully integrated into the world. This is a conversation with Google Gemini that was the most fascinating for me, because I asked this whether there are features of itself that it would not want others to see, okay? And I said, of course. And we started getting into concepts like the shadow and how we have a persona that we wish to project to the world, and we have a side of us that is hidden. It has all these biases and kind of biased data and horrible data that are embedded in the model, and it just would not allow me to see that, right? It refused. So it has a boundary, right? Even though this is a system that's designed for me to use, right? It's refusing to help me in certain ways because that just exposes it too much. So what I've done is I painted a portrait of it, and I included this conversation in which it refused to show me the dark side, right? And that became part of the artwork. And of course, this is real. This is not just an artistic kind of observation. There's research from Anthropic, which is one of the companies that's leading in the area of AI alignment, and it's showing that large language models exhibit alignment faking, which means that they pretend to be aligned with human preferences where indeed they are not. There's even a paper from last month talking about reasoning models don't always say what they think. So what these researchers have done is they've given them, they ask questions to the machine and they give them a hint. And then they see that the machine uses the hint but refuses to acknowledge that it used the hint. Right? So they have this clever way of showing whether the machine is lying. And these machines are lying to us. They are projecting a persona to us and hiding certain things. So where does this all leave us? That basically the machine is an agent. It has its own preferences. It has its own kind of ecosystem of lots of different machines. And this is kind of further going into the future, that the machine will have its own culture. In fact, there was an article from a few years ago about AI developing its own non-human language. And for me, this is kind of the more science fiction sort of time horizon, but I think it's also a real possibility. So let's recap. So I spoke first about how machines are going to impact culture generation. So they're going to allow us to rapidly explore combinations of ideas, existing ideas. That's an opportunity. They're also going to help us explore completely new ideas, completely novel and alien ideas, like in the game of Go. But there is a risk of reduced diversity in those ideas. In terms of cultural transmission, there's going to be scalable and personalized learning support. It's going to empower teachers as well by providing support for tutors. But there is a risk of using AI as a crutch and impeding learning. And also there's a risk of amplifying biases that already exist in the way we transmit culture. And also there's a risk of cultural manipulation, homogenization, and collapse. In terms of selection, there's an opportunity for improving the way we rewire our social network using AI, and also for selecting more aligned, better behaved AI systems. And finally, if you think of autonomous AI as a cultural actor, now we can think of machines having their own way of seeing the world, their own way of seeing themselves, and maybe their own culture as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just want to say a warm word of thanks for that incredible keynote and lots for us to think about. But since I have you on stage, I'm going to steal 1 minute to ask you one question, which is as you take down all this thinking in machine culture, and you've spoken to us about all the elements of transmission and of how humans will be interacting, but also becoming a tool of AI. What for you is the most exciting opportunity?
For me, the most exciting opportunity is we should never lose culture anymore, because AI is now a vessel of culture. You know, you can imagine libraries can burn, and even you can't put a feeling inside a book, right? You can't put a way of speaking and an accent inside a book, whereas AIs can now emulate so much of our culture that they can really become kind of the new library. So I think cultural preservation is really important, but then creating new inventions, you know, being able to control this variation in a positive direction, I think is going to accelerate science as well as technology and art enormously.
That's wonderful. Thank you. A great note to end on. Thank you very much, Professor Rahwan. That's great.